Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good morning and welcome to Smart Sales Hiring. How to hire the right salesperson for you nearly every time. And I got to throw that nearly in there because nothing's perfect. Here's the thing. When you are hiring, you're dealing with people. And when you're dealing with people, it is, as I like to say, an imperfect world. And nobody can hire every time. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you a general rule. Anytime you're talking to a sales coach, sales trainer, anyone who does what I do, and they tell you about anything that works every time, you're talking to a liar. Because everything we do deals with people. And with people, nothing works every time. I actually did a webinar series last year, and I kind of got out of the swing of it. But if you'll watch my newsletter and watch my LinkedIn page, I'm going to get back to doing a monthly webinar because, frankly, they're a hell of a lot of fun. I enjoy them. I enjoy how they kind of keep me in touch with everybody. And we'll be doing, obviously, Smart Sales Hiring won't be the webinar next month. Next month, I will be doing a webinar on selling at trade shows, and that'll be in conjunction with E3 exhibit services. And I'll have more information about that, again, on my LinkedIn and in my email newsletter. And so, with that, let's go ahead and get rolling because I have done a version of smart sales hiring for my God, nearly 20 years now. I've been in business now as the sales navigator, sales coach, trainer, consultant for over 21 years. My 21st anniversary was in September of this year, and well, that means that my business is old enough to drink, so I'm pretty excited about that. But the first version of smart sales hiring that I did rolled out in January of 20 or January of 2006. It was actually one of the first programs I did when I was started doing chamber speaking and that kind of thing. And back then, what smart sales hiring meant was that you had to be smart about hiring salespeople. And in other words, hire with your head, not with your gut. And that's still true. We want to be smart about hiring salespeople. We want to use our intellect rather than our intuition because intuition is a lot more fallible than intellect. And we want to use the best tools, techniques, processes, and procedures. But it means something different now, and part of that is the evolution of selling itself. The selling profession has changed more in the last 5 years than it has in the previous 100 years. And a lot of people, when I say that, a lot of people go, oh, well, yeah, COVID changed everything. No, COVID didn't change everything. What COVID did was took the changes that were already in place in the selling profession and put them on fast forward. And it changed the way that sellers communicate with their customers, not in all cases, but in some cases. And it definitely changed the way that customers interacted with salespeople and what customers wanted from salespeople. And the output of that is now smart sales hiring means being smart about hiring salespeople and hiring smart salespeople. It means both of those things. So we have to be smart about hiring salespeople, and we want to hire smart salespeople. I need to be smart about this PowerPoint. There we go. Got it moved because here's our new reality of sales. And I saw a very stark expression of this last week visiting with a salesperson. Uh, the successful salesperson going forward, the people who are going to be successful for the next 20 years, they're not going to look, they're not going to sound, they're not going to act like the salespeople that were successful for the last 2 decades or, hell, the 5 decades previous to that. And so we need to prepare. Let me explain what I mean by that. We are undergoing changes that are not only technological. Everybody thinks that the changes in sales are being driven by technology. They are sort of. The internet has affected selling, social media has affected selling, AI has affected selling in a big way. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be doing a webinar before the end of the year on AI and how it's affecting sales. And I'm going to talk a lot about what I consider to be good AI and bad AI. So I think that's when you'll probably want to jump onto. Uh, but yeah, there's a lot of technological influences that are hitting sales, and so salespeople very much need to be tech savvy. The days of the salesperson who sat there and said, "Well, I'm just not good at them darned old computers. I don't really want to use them." Man, that salesperson's obsolete. And I still talk to people who are that way. But more than that, sales is encountering changes that are generational and cultural. We are seeing a larger divide in business mindset, I'm going to call it, between Gen X, well, the best generation ever, let's be honest. What generation am I? Generation X. But we are seeing a big split in buying habits particularly between Gen X and the millennials and everybody down. And in the past, and when I started in sales, there were still people from the silent generation who were involved in buying and being part of company buying processes. The silent generation is that generation that was born between the two world wars, 1920 to 1939. And then, we had the World War II generation, we had the baby boomers. A lot of those people were very actively involved. Well, what's happened is those people formed relationships in a certain way. Those people tended to form business relationships based on personal connections first. And then once you had a personal connection with them, that kind of bought you the right to sell to them. So that required one type of selling approach. And there's a lot of salespeople out there who are still pretty much exclusively working that type of a relationship. However, what we have discovered is that millennials and Gen Zs have a very different approach to forming relationships in business. Millennials and Gen Zs are very much get to the damn point kind of people. And by the way, the average age of a B2B buyer nowadays is 36. That's right smack in that millennial generation. Millennials tend to be business first. In other words, when you approach a millennial, you need to be able to build relationships based on solving their business needs. And then that gets you the right to start to get to know them and form a personal connection. So they flip that script 180 degrees. Here's what I mean by the successful salesperson of the next 20 years will not look, sound, or act like the one of the last 2 decades. Salespeople now have to be versatile enough and smart enough and be able to think on their feet well enough to be able to form relationships with both kinds of people. And that's a big challenge. There's a lot of salespeople, particularly a lot of salespeople from Gen X and the boomer generation that are really struggling with that right now. And there's a lot of salespeople that are older that are doing very well at that. But that's something that we want to be conscious of as we are looking for new sales talent is where is that intellectual versatility? Do they have the ability to handle that flipping of the script? So, with that as a preface, you can succeed at smart sales hiring. Smart sales hiring it's not magic. And let me explain what I mean by that. When I started my business, one of the services that I offered to my clients was retained search recruiting. Don't do that anymore. I haven't done that for several years. But over the space of 13 years, I did 108 searches. And retained search meant, by the way, that they would actually sub the hiring process out to me, and then I would execute it all the way through the final interview and decision on their part. And I did 108 searches with a win rate of 82%. What that means is that 82% of the salespeople that I hired ramped up to quota in the time that we had set out for them and stayed at quota for at least 3 years. That to me is a win in sales hiring. You get 3 good years out of somebody, you have won that sales hire, and anything over that is a bonus. And by the way, the other 18%, I had a 90-day guarantee, which meant that if they washed out within 90 days, and sometimes I would encourage the company to wash them out. It was obvious they weren't going to succeed. I had to go back and redo it for free. I never missed on the second round. Now, does that mean that I'm a hiring genius? You're welcome to think so. What the hell? I encourage it. But what it really means is that I had assembled a set of tools, techniques, procedures, and processes that help me succeed. And I call those the elements of smart sales hiring. Those are the characteristics of a quality hire. And every one of you on this call right now can master and execute those elements. And I'm going to show you what those elements are right now. Element one, and this is one of the biggest mistakes I see in sales hiring. Never hire from a pool of one. Let me tell you what I mean by hiring from a pool of one. A pool of one is where you become aware that somebody's out there looking for a job, and maybe you interview that person, or maybe you just hire them and slap them right in. You go, well, I know John. I've met John a couple of times at trade shows. He's a good guy. Let's put him to work. And the problem with that is this. We can agree, I hope, that our objective, anytime we start searching for a salesperson, our objectives is to make the best hire that we can at any given time. We want to hire the absolute best person for us that is available to us at any given moment. When you are hiring from a pool of one, when you're building your entire hiring process around one person, you don't know that you can do that. You are hiring somebody and there may be a lot better talent out there. But it's not just that. Element one hires, hiring from a pool of one almost always is a gut instinct hire. Gut instinct hires are dangerous. Let me tell you what I mean by that. When I ask people, successful business owners, successful managers, what makes them successful, most of them, particularly business owners, most of them brag on their instincts. Man, I just know what customers want. I can feel it when somebody's in front of me. Yeah, they're hungry. All these platitudes, right? What that means is that they're making a gut instinct hire, and gut instinct hires have a very, very high fail rate. Pool of one hires correlate very well to gut instinct hires, and I'm going to help you work through getting away from the gut instinct hire over the next 48 minutes of this program. Friend referrals. Friend referrals are very, very dangerous. Here's what a friend referral looks like. Somebody already works for you, somebody you already trust. They come to you and say, hey, Jeff, I've got this friend who's a salesman and he's looking for a job, and man, this guy's awesome. He can sell ice to an Eskimo. And in business, we are conditioned to believe that referrals are the gold standard. Now, it's possible that this friend doesn't know anything about the applicant's work habits. They just know that my buddy's out of a job and I want something good to happen with my buddy. And hell, maybe I'd like to work with my buddy. Friend referrals are okay as a source of candidates, but don't treat them as anything more than what they are. They're a raw candidate. Same way with availability hires. Now, here's where I'm going to kill a sacred cow. And this is always a lot of controversy. Every time I talk about it, every time I post about it on LinkedIn, it doesn't matter. Three words that predict a very high fail rate in sales: industry, experience, required. Industry, experience, required. Because here's what you're saying. You're saying, I don't want to take the time to teach anybody my business. I'm going to try and shortcut this process and hire somebody that already supposedly knows my business so that I can just put them out and help them hit the ground running. And that's a 90% fail rate in my experience, because here's why. You're typically not getting your industry's best people unless there's been some sort of an upheaval within the industry. I'll give you an example of that. One of the industries that I work with a lot is the textile rental industry, laundry and linen, commercial laundries. And one of the biggest companies in that business, called Vestas, they just did a Saturday night massacre on their sales force. I mean, they literally let go of, God, I don't know, probably 80% or more of their national sales team. It's my gut feel is they're revving up for an acquisition. They're trying to cut costs wherever they can. But if that many of their people are out on the street, there's some damn good people out on the street looking for jobs. And to me, that's an exception to the industry experience required rule. But that is an extraordinary event. That is not something that is routine. On a routine basis, I actually tell people that you're best off hiring people from outside of your industry, because number one, they have a higher degree of credibility. They're not going around saying, hey, this other company, last week I was telling you they're the best ever, but I've changed companies to a competitor and now I'm telling you this company's the best ever. So you don't have that credibility gap. A good onboarding program, you can teach somebody your industry typically in about 30 days. Don't shortcut that part. So all of these are pool of one hires because a lot of times that industry experience comes up that's another version of the availability hire. Somebody from within the industry comes forward and says, "Hey, I need a job." And the hiring company for some reason never really probes why that person needs a job. So that's element one. Never hire from a pool of one. Element two, and this is the most important thing. And so if you remember nothing else from this program, I want you to remember this. And that is this: remain emotionally detached. I've got a number on the screen, 63. And unless you've seen this presentation before, which I think one or two of you may have, you don't know what 63 means. So I'm going to explain to you what 63 means, and it is going to tell you why it is so important to remain emotionally detached. Several years ago, the Wall Street Journal and I believe Columbia University decided to do a survey of hiring practices of what they considered the highly paid professions. Highly paid professions meant that basically it meant sales or management or even upwards to the executive level. And what they did was they sat in on thousands of interviews all over the country in companies ranging from $1 million dollars in annual revenue all the way up to the Fortune 100. And they just sat and they observed these interviews. And what they were watching for was the interview trajectory. And what they discovered was that 63% of the time, the hiring decision was actually made within the first 5 minutes of meeting the candidate. Think about that. The first 5 minutes, that interviewer's flipping and saying, okay, I want to hire this person. Now, does that mean, by the way, that they stopped the interview and said, okay, right now you're offered the job? No, absolutely not. That's not what it meant at all. What it meant was that the interview trajectory changed. The questions that candidate was getting asked changed at the 5 minute mark. And the observer could see whether or not the interviewer was falling in like with the candidate. And if they were falling in like, you can probably guess what kind of questions they were getting. Softballs. Questions that would be easy for them to knock out of the park because that reinforced that decision, that interviewer that said, yep, this is a person for me. On the other hand, if the interviewer did not particularly take an emotional attachment to that person, what kind of questions were they asking? Hardball questions, tough questions, questions that were tough for them to answer. And here's the dirty little secret: those are the kind of questions they should have been asking everybody. And what they discovered, both in sales and management, was that 63% of all sales hiring decisions were made within the first 5 minutes of meeting the candidate. Now, I'm going to throw another stat at you. Overall, sales hiring in the United States, professional sales hiring, only 1 out of 3 hires ever makes it to their first anniversary date. Think about that. And they're calling that a win. I call 3 years a win. They're calling that a win. And this was Sales and Marketing Management magazine, I believe. But what they're saying in that stat is that 2 out of 3 hires are such epic failures that they don't even make it 1 year at their company. 67%. Now, do you see any similarity between those two numbers? Yeah, 63 and 67%. I'm going to suggest to you that those gut instinct hires are the biggest reason why sales hiring has such a low fail rate. Because here's the thing: in 5 minutes, there's only one thing you can decide, and that is, I like this person. You can't really understand a whole lot about how they can be a contributor to your revenue picture. The problem is, most salespeople, even bad salespeople, tend to be what I call professionally likable. You've got to be a really lousy salesperson to not make a good impression within the first 5 minutes. God knows I've met them, but most salespeople, even ones who can't sell, they can make a good impression in the first 5 minutes. So interviewers who do that are particularly susceptible to a bad sales hire. So what I'm saying to you is remain emotionally detached. Not easy, but keep that candidate at emotional arm's length. You got all the time in the world to like him later after you hire him. But through the interview process, evaluate them intellectually. And here's the thing, when you get emotionally attached, it prevents you from executing element three, which is spot the red flags. One of the great things about sales hiring, and quite honestly, one of the great things about interpersonal relationships, is that people will show you or tell you how they're going to fail you. The only thing you've got to do is create opportunities for them to do so and pay attention when they do. I like this meme here. Very polished guy at the job interview. 10 minutes after getting home, he's on the couch eating Cheetos, drinking a beer, flipping the remote. That's not a horrible thing, except that 6 months after he's hired, that's going to be him during working hours. And that was a red flag that excited interview probably didn't spot. I'm going to give you an example of how this worked. This is a long time ago now. This is probably 10, 12 years ago. But I've got a client here in Kansas City that makes marketing software. They're very good products. I'm not going to say who because of the story I'm about to tell. But the owner of that company called me one day. He said, "Hey, Troy," he said, "we're hiring a salesperson. We've got somebody that we think is absolutely awesome. And we'd like you to come in and participate in the second interview. Kind of lead that second interview with him, and then you can tell us what you think." Okay. So I go there and I'm interviewing the guy, behavioral interview, which we'll talk about momentarily. And this guy, I got to be honest, the guy was crushing the questions. He had worked for a company that made a different type of software, not a competitive software, but he had sold software. My client was hiring for a high prospecting position, 75,000 annual salary, 150 package first year. It was a financial move up for this guy. And I'm interviewing him, and I mean, I got it. Like I said, the interview's going great. I'm not finding anything. And then I said, okay, when you were successful with this other software company, what was your favorite thing about that job? He said, well, my favorite thing was that they had an assistant working with me that set all my appointments for me. Hello, red flag. What did he just tell me? Well, he told me he's not the one doing the prospecting. He's telling me that somebody else is setting all of his appointments for him, which means that if you expect, and that was his favorite thing, which means that if you expect him to prospect, you're probably in trouble. So the interview ends, and my client looks at me. He's got this smile on his face like his daughter just graduated magna cum laude from Harvard. He goes, "Wasn't he great?" I said, "Yeah, except he's not going to prospect." "What are you talking about, Troy?" And I walked him back through this scenario, the question and answer. He had just totally glossed over it. He had missed that red flag. And I walked him back through a scenario, his face just fell. I crushed him, honest to God, because he was so excited about having this guy work. And I said, here's the thing. I said, you can hire this guy at 150K. But to get what you need out of him, you're probably going to have to hire him an assistant at about 50K, and that assistant at 50K may have the more valuable skill set. By the way, 10, 12 years ago, teleprospecting was still the primary way of filling your appointment funnel. Now it's not, and I'll probably be doing a webinar on that at some point in the future as well on modern prospecting. But the good news was that my client didn't hire the guy. The guy actually ended up going to a competitor of my client's and failed pretty miserably because they expected him to prospect. Spotting those red flags. Now, some of the more common red flags, lateness. I do not interview anybody that isn't there at the appointed time. And God, I've had so many excuses. Well, traffic. Have you ever driven in this city? You ever driven this route before? Well, yeah. Does traffic get heavy? Yeah, okay, you didn't prepare for that. I am a believer in the idea that a competent salesperson is there on time for their appointments because they're smart enough to know that that appointment may not happen if they're not there on time and on game. If they're dressed inappropriately, I'll be honest, I would rather have a candidate who dresses a little too far up for the interview than too far down. If a candidate for a construction supervisor position came in, they were wearing a suit and tie, not a red flag to me. If a candidate for a banker came in and they're wearing a polo shirt and jeans, red flag. I like somebody who's going to aim a little higher rather than a little lower. Red flag being somebody who's not prepared for the interview, who really doesn't know, hasn't even done the most rudimentary research on the company. All of these are red flags, and that salesperson is telling you, here's how I'm going to fail. All you got to do is pay attention. But again, you've got to remain emotionally detached to be able to execute that red flag. And here's what we're up against in the hiring process. This is a picture of the careers section at the Barnes and Noble on the Country Club Plaza in Kansas City. I actually took this picture. I refresh it quite often. I took this picture about 2 months ago. And we can have an argument over whether or not people are really reading books nowadays. The only thing I can tell you is they're obviously still selling them. Here's the crazy thing. The careers section has actually performed a hostile takeover on the marketing and advertising section. If you look under marketing and advertising, that's still career books. What we're up against are trained interviewers or trained interviewees. Most of these books could have the same title, and that is How to Package and Pretend Your Way into a Job That You Are in No Way Qualified For. They teach candidates how to duck questions. They teach candidates how to be evasive. They teach candidates how to lie. And the hiring managers who don't understand those lies and those techniques, they're the victim. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you some homework. Go to your local bookstore or even get on Amazon if you prefer. Buy two or three of these books and read them to see what candidates are learning about how to evade your interview techniques. You'll be shocked. But once you know, you can come up with your own defenses. Element four, use a winning process. And when I say a winning process, these 6 steps are the processes that I use to produce that 82% win rate. I believe that you can have too many steps in a hiring process. You get too many interviews, you're going to drop good candidates out. I believe that this process is applicable for most hires. Not all. There are some that require other technical qualifications that you may need to delve into. But step one, build a wide candidate pool. I'll discuss that in a moment. Step two, a simple resume screen. By the way, I'm going to deep dive into all of these momentarily. Step number three, a resume focused interview. Step number four, due diligence. Step number five, a behavioral interview. Step number six, a third party assessment, and that gives you enough of a data stack to be able to make a decision. And this entire process is about building a data stack, a set of information that tells you, yeah, this person is probably appropriate for me. Let's talk about building a wide candidate pool. One of the things that scares hiring managers about a search is they go, oh my God, Troy, I don't want to screen all those resumes. Too bad. I'm going to show you momentarily how to screen resumes in 10 seconds. But you can never say yes to people who don't know that you're hiring, but it's very easy to say no to people who do approach you. So here's how to build a wide candidate pool. First of all, you do need to advertise. You need to advertise, and my two favorite forums for advertising are the LinkedIn jobs boards. Don't just settle for making a post on LinkedIn. Put it on the LinkedIn jobs boards. Put it on Indeed and sponsor those ads. The ad should be a marketing focused ad. Don't just slap your HR job description up there. Make it marketing centric to explain to the candidate who clicks on that ad why they should just absolutely be dying to work for you right up until the point that you tell them no. Everything you do, that this is a sales and marketing process. Think about how we market to our customers. Everything we do is you need to do business with us. We are the best solution for you. Well, this is you need to work for us. We are absolutely the best solution for you and your career. And that's what the verbiage needs to be. You should augment it, in my opinion, with a video job ad. A video job ad is just a short video, 60 seconds or less. Put it on YouTube, on TikTok Reels, or on TikTok, on Facebook Reels, on LinkedIn. Just you talking to the screen, basically giving them some marketing content about how you want them to apply for your job, what's great about it, and in the caption, put a link to the actual job ad. This is a technique that's worked very well in Europe. It works well here when people have the guts to try it, but very seldom do I see people actually trying it, but it does work. It increases your candidate pool, and I've seen many times that your actual final candidate, your hire, comes from that. Think about that generational disconnect again. How are the younger generations getting a lot of their information? Well, they're getting it through TikTok, through Facebook Reels, through YouTube Shorts, through LinkedIn. Go where they are and get them. Here's another way to source candidates, and this is not one that I've tried, but God, I want somebody to. I'd love it if one of you tried the sourcing candidates this way and tell me about that. Little unconventional. Go to a festival or a craft fair. You know those annoying salespeople that are selling windows or hot tubs or home improvement, and they're practically reaching out in the aisle to grab you by their sleeve and talk to you about what they're selling? I think those are one hell of a good candidate pool for professional business to business salespeople because think about it. First of all, those people are virtually rejection proof. They, they deal with rejection all day, every day, and they're doing this on the weekend. And I mean, they're getting told no, no, no constantly, and yet they stay positive and keep doing their job. Number two, they usually look fairly professional. You can assess them in the real live environment. And number three, almost any B2B job is going to be an upgrade for where they're at. A lot of those people aren't even on salary. A lot of those people are on straight commissions. So I got to tell you, and this occurred to me a few weeks ago as my fiance and I were walking the Apple Festival in Topeka. I looked at some of those people. I thought, man, I bet those would be great candidates. So do something a little unconventional. Take some business cards with you, walk, and if you see one of those people or you encounter one of those people that is professional, that impresses you as somebody that you'd at least like to talk to, give them your card. And by the way, remember, don't hire from a pool of one. All those pool of one candidate sources that we talked about a minute ago, put those into a search. Let them compete for the job. Same way with the window salespeople. Let them compete for the job and see if they can win them. Now, those type of people are definitely going to require some strong onboarding and training. But I think it might be worth it because I think they have the traits that would help them succeed in an awful lot of B2B jobs. Let's talk for a minute about comp. I did bring up straight commission a minute ago. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this slide actually gets more and more dated, but every now and then I still run into people that are trying to pay straight commission. For most industries, straight commission is dead. Salespeople want to be invested in. They want to feel like the company they're working for has some skin in the game and an investment in making them successful. And one way they measure that is whether or not they are getting a base salary to live on while they're trying to ramp up to sales performance. For me, the ideal comp program looks like this. The salary covers the basics of living. I never want my salespeople to be wondering if the rent's going to get paid or where their next meal is coming from. The salary covers what I call the basics of life. Commission, however, covers the lifestyle. You're going to eat on the salary, but it's going to be hamburger helper. If you want steak, go sell something. And then a bonus for overachievement. Had this conversation with a client yesterday. For me, overachievement starts at about 20% above quota and goes up from there. Somebody really knocks it out of the park, they deserve a little bit of extra reward. So for me, and by the way, the salary component could be wildly different depending on what kind of an applicant pool you want to attract. I'm just giving you a basic structure for an entry to mid-level sales job. So let's talk about element five. Now we're back to the emotional attachment. The way to defeat emotional attachment is this. Your mentality needs to be seek to exclude rather than include. At the first steps of the hiring process, you should be seeking reasons why they are not the right person for you. Look at this guy in front of a velvet rope. I don't know if you've ever been to Vegas and gone to one of the clubs in the casinos, but the clubs in the big casinos are all the same. They got the velvet rope, they got a line of people standing there, big beefy guy like this. The only thing is, the big beefy guy is usually holding a clipboard. The clipboard's got names on it. And if your name's on it, you can walk right up, go right in. I've got a friend in Vegas who she's a human VIP pass. It doesn't matter what club we want to go to. Excuse me for a second. It doesn't matter what club we want to go to. Gravelly voice, she just walks up to the bouncer, goes, "He's with me," or "They're with me," and on in we go. Failing that, there's a line of people, and that bouncer is looking at the doorman. He's looking at those people. He's not looking for reasons to let them in. He's looking for reasons not to let them in. Why have that line? Because a lot of times you'll finally get past the line, the club will be half empty inside because that line creates artificial demand. Your mentality needs to be like that bouncer. At the early stages, look for reasons not to hire them. Let's talk about quick resume screening. I promised you I'd show you a method of screening a resume in 10 seconds, and here it is. I've used this method for 25 years and it works. I look for three things. Number one, out of the last 5 year snapshot of their career, I look for them to have had the same job for 3 of those years. The only time I'm flexible on that is when you've got a very young entry level candidate or maybe somebody who's only had one or two jobs right out of college. I've got a client who calls those just outs. If you're looking at a just out or an almost just out, you can be a little flexible on that one, but you got to be really, really careful on the other screening. But for somebody who's a veteran who's been in sales for 6 years or more, out of the last 5 years, they need to show me that they're not a job jumper and they can hold the same job for 3 years out of that last five. And if they can't do that, they're not going to make it past the resume screening. The second part is allied sales experience. And I'm usually pretty broad on this. For a B2B job, it's B2B sales experience. For a B2C job, B2C sales experience. And then finally, some sort of accomplishment. I don't want to just know what they did. I wanted to know that they are good at it and that they actually were able to put up numbers. And I don't pass any judgment on what that accomplishment is. Different things mean different things in different industries. If somebody tells me that they grew their territory 5% year over year, I might question that during the interview, but I'm going to accept that as an accomplishment because if it's important enough for them to put it on, it probably means something in their business. Um, and even the way that different industries express sales numbers can be very, very different from industry to industry. So as long as they claim an accomplishment, I'm again, I might question it during the interview, but I'm not going to use it as a knockout in the resume screening. Now let's talk about the resume focused interview. The first interview is what I call the resume focused interview. Every salesperson tells a story with their resume. That resume is a narrative of their career. Now, I don't want to shock you. Some people exaggerate on their resumes. No, no, really. Some people even lie. And if you are not looking for the lie, if you're not asking detailed questions, you can be the victim of that lie, and then you fall into that 2 out of 3 fail rate. The way to defeat those techniques is to ask very detailed questions. Focus on numbers. Ask about sales numbers. Ask where they were against quota. Ask about their comp plan. Ask about what they made, and then make all those numbers match up. Now, some of you may be in areas where you are handicapped as far as your ability to ask about past income. A great way around that is to ask, tell me about the progression of your career, because a lot of times people will express that in compensation terms. But here's my rule on any accomplishment. If they can quantify it, if they can explain how they did it, if they can prove it, then it really happened. And if not, not. On my first interview cycle years ago in 1998, it was my first sales management job at Ameripride. Had a guy come in from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and one of the things that he had on his resume was that he had been the Central Region Rookie of the Year 2 years before with Enterprise. That's impressive. Enterprise is a good company. They have a great training program. They hire top people out of college. And so I said, that's a great accomplishment. I said, how can you prove it? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, do you have a trophy, a certificate, a letter? He goes, oh, well, I've got a letter from my regional VP. I said, well, I'd love to see that. He says, well, it's out in the car right now. Would you like me to go out and get it? Yes, I would. He went out and I never saw him again. I called his bluff all the way out. Make people prove it. Proof can be a document. Proof can be some sort of an award. Proof can even be a coworker or a former boss saying that it actually happened. But remember, people will tell you how they will fail. Here are some of the resume focused questions that I like. Obviously, describe your job duties. How is your performance measured? How did you perform against those measurements? Again, income, if you're allowed to ask it, don't just ask income last year. Ask income every year on that job because we want people to be growing. Have them explain the accomplishment. Whatever questions you have from the resume review, ask plenty of detailed questions. I like to have a resume focused interview that lasts about an hour, and I like to leave the last 10 to 15 minutes for their questions. Sometimes you will have an interviewee that decides they want to try and control the interview by asking questions of you early on. And my advice to you is to just tell them, look, this is my time to learn about you. There will be plenty of time at the end for your questions, I promise. But right now, I'm asking the questions, and I'm just looking for some answers. By the way, you'll usually lose about half of your interview pool at the first interview. People's going to show you how they're going to fail for whatever reason. And again, this is an interview for you to figure out why not to hire them. It's not an interview for you to fall in like. Then due diligence. Due diligence consists of a few things. Reference checks. Yes, you should check references. 40% of all hires are made without checking references, even when they are asked for. I've called dead people. I called a guy once who said he physically hated the candidate. Don't be that person. Call references. You'll be amazed at what you get. If they claim a degree, check it. Obviously, criminal background checks. Again, some jurisdictions don't allow you to do that, but they do allow you to extend a job offer contingent upon the passing of a criminal background check. So always check criminal backgrounds. Past employers, if they're going to be driving on your insurance, always check driving record, Social Security verification. I'm not a fan of checking credit reports. Look at their social networking. See what they put out there on LinkedIn and on Facebook out for the public. You can't ask to friend them, but you can look at what they put out there for everyone. Due diligence, again, looking for reasons not to hire them. And if you find something, don't move forward. I don't give a lot of slack in these early stages in the hiring process because in my career, every time I have, it's come back to bite me. Now, let's talk about behavioral interviewing. And I do half-day trainings on behavioral interviewing. It's a huge subject, but I've got to touch on it a little bit. And really, in touching on it, what I'm looking for is for you to start doing your own research and learn more about behavioral interviewing and learn how to implement for yourself. But that's the second interview for me is a behavioral interview. A behavioral interview, you want to establish job fit. Now, by the way, you can be positive, you can be inclusive because you've eliminated all the obviously incorrect candidates. And I want you to establish job fit by thinking about behaviors that they're going to need to express, either positive or negative, on your job, and then create questions to match up past situations. A behavioral interviewing is question is, tell me about a time when you, or tell me about an instance, or describe a time, or any of those kind of things. What you're looking to do is have that candidate tell real stories about real events that actually happened and explain to you how they handled it. And what you're looking for here is what I call the STAR system. STAR, situation, that's the S. Task or action, that's the TA. What did they do about it? And then the result. In other words, what were they facing? What did they do about it? How did it work out for them? And a lot of times you're going to have to press for those details early on. What I found is that good candidates, after you've pressed them for details on the first two or three questions, they train themselves and they start supplying their own information. Now, if a candidate opens an interview, a response to this with, well, what I would do, stop them right there. I don't want to know what you would do. I want to know what you did. Tell me about a real situation. Not everybody's going to have an answer for every question. If you have a behavioral interview with 20 questions, you might have a couple of them where they say, I've never encountered that. But if you're talking about people with any life experience and you get more than that, be very suspicious. and press for details. In other words, they'll say, well, I was selling to a steel company in Kansas City. What was the name of the company? What was the name of your contact? If people are spinning fables, they're not going to think that fable all the way through. Pressing for details will expose truth or falsehood of these answers. Again, this is a very quick and dirty guide to behavioral interviewing. And that's all I have time for, but I encourage you to learn a lot more about it. I'm actually working on developing a series of online courses that are going to be accessible through a website, online on-demand courses. Behavioral interviewing is going to be one of those things that I develop because it is such a huge and important subject, but I don't have that ready to roll out right now. But learn about it. And then the final step, which I don't have a slide for, is a third-party psychometric assessment. There are thousands upon thousands of assessments out there. It's insane how many is, and most of them are crap. They're created in somebody's basement or on a kitchen table or something like that. There are only 12 assessments out there that I'm aware of that meet the Federal Department of Labor guidelines for being a non-discriminatory hiring tool. What that means is that if you use that as a rationale for not extending a job offer, then that will stand up in court should you ever be challenged on that hiring process. I don't know what all 12 of them are. What I do know is that the one that I recommend, and I have no financial connection with this company whatsoever. The guy is a friend of mine, but he's been an incredible asset. He raised my hiring accuracy from 61% to 82%. Uh, the assessment is the Profile Sales Assessment by Wiley International. My source, and if you want to write this down, please do. Job Match Assessment, all one word, jobmatchassessment.com. And the guy's name who owns it is Kirk Young. He's very, very well versed in these assessments. Great guy, very anxious. I mean, you order one assessment for I think it's $240, and he'll get on the phone and do a briefing on it with you. He puts a lot of himself into these. I strongly encourage you make this a part of your hiring processes. And again, there's no money transfer between me and Kirk. I think I've probably bought him more lunches over the years than he's bought me. I don't do kickbacks. I just, anytime I refer you to a solution, it's because I believe that they're very good. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you one on background checks as well. Write this down. ValidityScreening.com. The word validity, the word screening altogether.com. They'll do criminal background checks very reasonably. The last one I did, this is several years ago. The last one I did, I think, was about $50. I'm sure it's more now. But check them out if you need a source for criminal background checks. They're outstanding. They could do background and sex offender checks. Great resources. But use these steps in the hiring process. Build a wide candidate pool. Use a 10-second resume screen. Do a good resume focused interview. Do your due diligence. Check your references. Check your background. Do a strong behavioral interview. And again, please go out and do more research on behavioral interviewing. And then finally, use a third-party assessment to lock it in. That's how I got to an 82% win rate in hiring. That's how you can succeed at smart sales hiring. And remember, when you are hiring people, think about the traits that are going to be needed to succeed going forward in sales, not the traits needed to succeed going backwards. There's a lot of good time Charlie salespeople out there that are charisma and nothing else. Customers nowadays want expertise, they want value for their time, and you need to find salespeople who can provide them that. So, with that, I am going to open the floor up. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and then I'm going to have some final remarks. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat room. Here we go, Jeff. If all interviewing has been done virtually, do you recommend an in-office meet and greet prior to final offer? That's an excellent question. I'm going to back you up a little bit. I do not believe that all interviewing should be done virtually. I Even if you're hiring remotely, and I know you have offices, or I mean, you serve territories that are away from the home office. My recommendation is this. I'm okay with doing the resume focused interview virtually. I've done a lot of those, but I would always do at least the behavioral interviewing eyeball to eyeball in person because there are things that you can see about people's reactions to questions in person that I really don't think you can pick up on a video screen. So yeah, that's my recommendation. But if all else fails, absolutely you should be in front of them before you present that final offer. And if you're in a remote territory, if let's say that you are hiring in a territory that you're not in, that is some distance away, go ahead and do your resume focused interviews virtually, but then group up your behavioral interviews and go there and have those behavioral interviews all in one day. I've done it before. It's exhausting. You kind of interview your guts out, but it's important. I really believe in-person interaction is still very vital. When I talk about salespeople needing to be versatile, salespeople do need to be competent on video conferencing technology. And I think that is an argument for doing at least some of the process, maybe even if nothing else, a short screen virtually so you know that they know how to use it. But yeah, you absolutely should be meeting them in person prior to the final offer, and preferably you should be doing that behavioral interviewing in person. I hope that helps, Jeff. Anybody else? Let's see. Looks like there's not anybody else. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just my final remarks. My hope is that, and I realize I've covered a lot of ground in less than an hour. My hope is that today serves as a jumping off point for you. I hope that what it has done is stimulated some intellectual curiosity because there's a lot of topics that you're going to need to learn about more. I mean, like I said, I sure as hell can't tell you about behavioral interviewing in 5 minutes, but what I hope I can do is spark some intellectual curiosity for you to research the topic. Take this, research, learn more about it, and become competent at this because one of the biggest wastes of time and money is bad sales hires or inappropriate sales hires. The same salespeople aren't going to be good for every opportunity. So, there is no universal sales hire. So yeah, that's my recommendation to you is use this as a template and as a jumping off point.